Hey Internet, hey YouTube, I have one simple question for you. Monster Train spikes, how do they work? Let's check it out. This is Nate, you can also call me Nathan, but please never call me Nathaniel. Let's start with the basics. Spikes are considered a buff, which when applied give the following status effect. When a unit with spikes is attacked, the user takes 1 damage per stack. The fact that spikes is a buff, noted by the green background, is relevant for several aspects which will be covered later on in the video. There are 2 units, both awoken units, which have spikes in their text. The first is the Sentient with the Bristling upgrade path, and the second is the Thorn Hollow, who gains 2 spikes per rejuvenation trigger. In addition to these 2 units, the Awoken clan has several spells which can grant spikes. These are Cycle of Life, Pyre Shards, Sharpen, and Spreading Spores. Finally, the Awoken have another spell, Bramble Lash, which does burst damage to the front enemy unit equal to 10 times the total spikes on all friendly units in the room. Finally, the Awoken has 3 different enhancements available for spikes. The first comes in the form of a unit, the Shard Channeler, who increases the damage per stack by 1 on all friendly units on the same floor. An artifact, the Petrified Crucible, has a similar effect but for the entire train. Finally, the artifact Gnarled Root increases the number of spikes you receive +1 each time it is applied, and that counts for both the unit text and spells. Unfortunately, the Awoken clan does not have a monopoly on spikes. The boss, the Steel Slate, comes with 2 spikes by default, and the Conduit Redirector grants 2 spikes to all enemy units in the same room. In addition, one of the standard trials you'll encounter throughout your runs is the Retribution Trial, adding 3 spikes to all non-boss enemy units. But hey, this is all stuff you could read in the Monster Train wiki, so let's get into some of the more advanced interactions with spikes and see how they work. Interaction number 1. What happens when a multi-strike, sweep, or trample unit attacks into multiple units with spikes? In this first example, we have all enemy units with 3 spikes, and our Hornbreaker Prince with the Brawler upgrade giving him multi-strike 1. Here we'll torch the backliner, and we'll end the turn. Watch carefully, and you'll notice that as the Hornbreaker Prince attacks, he gets 2 damage triggers against him, both for 3 damage, which is the damage from the spikes. In the second example, we have 2 enemy units with spikes. We have a Cold Kalia and Tethys with sweep. Watch what happens when we end the turn and the spike units attack into the enemy. If you look closely, you'll see 2 4 damage triggers above the Cold Kalia. Those are the 4 damage spike triggers from attacking both enemy units. Last example. We have again 4 units with spikes. We have our Penumbra Monstrous with Trample, and we've put in a morsel to block some of the damage. But you'll notice that the Penumbra is still going to die. So what's happening here? Well, the morsel takes the first tick of damage, Penumbra takes 15 damage, and then dies from 4 ticks of spikes, 1 tick for each unit attacked. One important note for Trample and Sweep. Even if your unit dies while attacking, its full damage would still be applied as if it had lived through the attack. So, what happens when a unit with multi-strike, sweep, or trample attacks into multiple enemy units? And the answer? The unit will take damage for each tick of damage done to units with spikes. And this is true for both friendly and enemy units. Interaction number 2. What happens when a unit with Revenge attacks a unit with spikes? Do spikes trigger Revenge? Here we have 2 enemies with 3 spikes, a Sentient with Revenge Draw 1, and a Titan Sentry with Revenge Apply Frostbite. Let's see what happens when they attack into the spikes. The Sentient gets 2 Revenge triggers from direct damage from units, and a 3rd from attacking into spikes, with the Titan Sentry also getting a Revenge trigger applying Frostbite when attacking into the spikes. Again, this holds true for friendly and enemy units. So, what happens when a unit with Revenge attacks a unit with spikes? Do spikes trigger Revenge? And the answer? When a unit attacks an enemy with spikes, they will get a Revenge trigger. I will also note that if that unit has multi-strike or trample, they can get multiple revenge triggers. Interaction number 3. What happens when you apply spikes to a unit with slay triggers and an enemy unit dies to the spikes damage? Oh no, it looks like the Hornbreaker Prince has gotten himself into a spiky situation. We'll have to put a unit in front to block the damage, right? Well, maybe not. Let's see what happens when we apply spikes to the Hornbreaker Prince. Now, the combat preview is showing him increasing health. What's happening here? Let's watch it as we end the turn. As both units attack into the Hornbreaker Prince, the second unit dies, giving the Hornbreaker Prince a slay trigger, granting him 10 armor. Looks like the Hornbreaker Prince finally got to pay the enemies back for all of those lost trials. So, what happens when you apply spikes to a unit with slay triggers and an enemy unit dies to the spikes damage? And the answer? The unit will get slay triggers for each enemy which dies to the spikes damage. Let's end with some spikes tips and tricks. One of the most important uses of spikes is as a way to reach low health backline units. Remember that the intention with spikes is to deal damage by absorbing damage. This means that spikes are best used in combination with high health, regen, armor, endless, or units that are easy to reform. Even a few spikes can make a huge difference during boss fights, where the bosses are often paired with low health backline units. Spikes are one of the best counters to stealth units, because the stealth units will take spike damage even while stealthed. Conversely, giving stealth to your own spike units will often leave you feeling disappointed when the enemies aren't dying to your spikes. If you're struggling to deal with tanky frontline units, Bramble Lash can be a great way to deal high burst damage on floors with spike units. Finally, be very cautious around enemy extinguish triggers. They can often result in your spike units taking large bursts of damage that you weren't expecting. Consider the following dangers regarding spikes. Avoid taking the Retribution Trial if your primary damage dealers rely on multi-strike, sweep, or trample. Seraph the Chaste will reduce your spikes in half each time he applies his cleansing effect. This means you either need to have a way to consistently apply more spikes throughout the battle, or you need other methods of dealing with large health units and backline units. Think carefully about how you use your spike application spells. Spikes are often better on a single unit with high spikes rather than multiple units with low spikes. I'd like to end with a few use cases which might not seem so obvious at first. Use case number 1. Adding spikes to units with slay triggers can help them stack damage and armor provided they are tanky enough. One of my favorite builds is going Hellhorned Awoken, getting the Wrathful Hornbreaker Prince, and piling on the spikes. Use case number 2. In almost every instance, you don't want to apply buffs to enemies. However, you can apply spikes to enemy units to cheat out some revenge triggers for your own units. Last use case. Adding the +4 spikes upgrade to your tank is often better than the extra 25 health. You'll really be thanking yourself when you're removing those backline blight generating units and low health multi-strikers. Thanks for watching. I got a lot of great comments and support on my last video, and I hope this one was as entertaining as the first, maybe even a little better. If you did like the video, please subscribe, hit that like button, and feel free to join me on Twitch at twitch.tv/never_Nathaniel. And I'll see you in my next video.